The UL 9540A is a performance standard, and by itself um, allows us to characterize how lithium-ion based systems have hazards and how they manifest themselves. But when it comes to deployment, it's NFPA 855 that takes some of the work done under UL 9540A and packages that into guidance when it comes to, for example, setbacks from buildings or from ventilation exhausts or separation between units. So it takes some of the work done by characterizing how these systems fail to help with deployment. And the IFC sits one level above that and essentially formulates the legal framework under which everyone is expected to use these codes because the IFC is often a part of local building codes. So there are codes, standards, and legal requirements, and that's how these three things will wrap themselves together.
A lot of folks look at it as, hey, did we pass or fail? Did our product pass or fail this? But really, the goal of this test is to gather data, specific moments in like a thermal story of when the a product's ability to dissipate heat is overcome by the ramping up of heat, right? So there's some technical language around this, but I think it's good to notice that UL 9540A is characterizing not active fire, but something called thermal runaway.
It's starting to differentiate a little bit more between the large-scale fire test and thermal runaway. And I think this is an important distinction that we're seeing. We have a snippet here from San Jose Fire Department that you can see. This is a bulletin that they put out. And the kind of the takeaway that you see there that we're quoting there on the left-hand side, talking about thermal runaway testing is not equivalent to large-scale fire testing. And this has left jurisdictions with the having to make the judgment call based on that 9540A testing. We are getting good data. We're getting good information from that test, no doubt. But the question very often can become, well, we know what happens in a thermal runaway event, but we don't necessarily know what happens in a fire event.
Once it is a ANSI consensus standard, we will see more and more acceptance from fire departments and AHJs as their inputs would be incorporated, primarily because it's in the interest of the AHJs as well to adopt this and bound the response that they have to be prepared with in case of an event. This helps the jurisdictions as well in their preparedness. So I'm excited to see, when this becomes a consensus standard, and I expect it to be adopted very quickly, both by developers and by AHS. A lot of utilities required non-export. So those who are familiar with, for example, Southern California Edison's net metering handbook for energy storage very clearly states non-export has to be established. And in order to achieve that, but also to certify that it has been achieved, 1741 CRD was written. It was complex. It had multiple modes of non-export, and the NRTLs that could certify were few, but the biggest issue was acceptance. Not all utilities and AGs were accepting it. And there, I think, is the genesis of 3141, where the requirement for non-export and also load control is now formalized in an outline of investigation. It will require the manufacturers to test comprehensively, have multiple NRTLs that can do this work. It will remove ambiguity. And once the outline of investigation phase moves over into a standards phase, it will also address the uncertainty of which utility is accepting this.
Thinking back to NEC 705.13, kind of the impetus for this initially was to safely prevent overload on our system bus bars. So we want to make sure our main service panel never exceeds its rating. We want to make sure the same is true for any aggregation panels in our system. And a PCS or EMS kind of lets us transition from more physical constraints to programmable ones. So now we can use current set points for our calculations in place of just the maximum continuous output current we would find on a data sheet. So gives us a lot more flexibility, potentially opens a lot of doors to oversizing resources, whether that's a source or a load, and then starting to allow all these devices to talk to each other. And where we're seeing that more and more is not only smart sources, so smart interactive inverters, but also smart loads. So maybe we can shift certain loads from one time of day to another, ramp them up, ramp them down in a more dynamic fashion.